It is no problem to start a moving company with the anticipation of wanting to eventually sell it. It's very important that when you start a company, especially a moving company, you go into it knowing what your ultimate goal is, whether that be to pass it on to kids, whether that might be to sell it one day, right? But when you build it to sell, there's a few things that we need to be thinking about, okay? The first one that kills me every time are the procedures that you learn and build, especially if it's your first company, when you get the company started, right? Those are the hours at night, on the weekends, early in the morning. Those hours are usually spent on building the operations of the company. How do you want the sales script to flow? How are we going to do lead acquisition? What does our process look like for getting the trucks ready in the morning, right? All of those processes when you're first starting out in your moving company, right, are built in the evenings and the weekends. During the day, you're taking your sales calls, you're running your dispatch, you're fixing the issues, you're a firefighter, right? Putting out all the fires. That's what you're doing during the day. But all of the time spent on the weekends and evenings building these procedures are incredibly valuable to you. Sadly, they're not valuable to anybody else. When you go to sell a company, it's more on your earnings of the company, the assets acquired in the business, right? That's all results stemming from the business that you built, from those operations and sales scripts and things that you did in the evenings and the weekends to make this business actually possible, okay? So because you've built these in the front end, the result of that is earnings, and that's what you're selling the company for. Okay, so there's a few people that you're possibly selling your business to. 3 that we're going to talk about. Okay, and the first one, which most people talk about, is private equity. Okay, private equity is not going to look at your moving company unless you're doing at least $1 million a year in EBITDA. What is EBITDA? EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Basically, it's earnings, right? The net operating income of the company. Okay. If you're not doing $1 million a year in net operating income, then chances are that you're still a proprietor. You're still managing the business day to day, okay? And a private equity firm doesn't want to buy a job. Most people don't want to buy a job when they're buying a business. They want to buy earnings. And so if you're selling your business solely from earnings, then you got to have some earnings to be able to sell. Okay. So again, a private equity firm's not going to be looking at you unless you're doing $1 million in earnings. Okay. Which is the minimum of about $5 million in sales, usually closer to $10 million in sales as a moving company. The problem with that is it's very difficult to get there. Okay. We have 120 some clients that we're doing bookkeeping for on a monthly basis, more than that with taxes and advisory and all that stuff. But looking at those companies, we have less than 10 companies that are doing over $1 million a year in EBITDA. That's not very many. And all we do is moving companies, and usually we're not doing very, very, very small companies. So as a percentage, it's less than 10% of the companies are truly doing $1 million in EBITDA. I say that to say it's very, very difficult to get to $1 million a year in EBITDA. That's a really lofty goal to do that, okay? Now, while it's very beneficial to sell to private equity, while you can get a 4 to 7 times multiple depending on the fluidity of the operations of the company and the true goal of what the private equity is looking for, the better thing that I recommend is let's try to sell to somebody that's potentially local or another moving company in your market, which we're going to get to. Okay, so let's talk about somebody local. So many times, if you have a business broker is going to find someone that had another career, they have some money, they got out of the career, and they want to start a business, but they don't want to start from zero. They want to buy a business that actually produces earnings. And so they're going to bring that buyer to you, and they're going to look at your company, and they're going to look at a few things, right? Yes, they're going to look at EBITDA. That's exactly what a private equity firm looks at, right? More importantly, though, they're going to look at something called seller's discretionary earnings, or SDE, okay? Seller's discretionary earnings is EBITDA plus, right, adding back in some of the cost of the owner. So think of all the costs that you as an owner have the business pay for that if you weren't there, it really wouldn't pay for. Those need to be added back into EBITDA, and that's your seller's discretionary earnings. So when we look at seller's discretionary earnings, we think about a personal truck that you own that you drive to and from work. Maybe you drive out to a job site. It's not exactly how the IRS wants it, but a lot of times I'll see people put the loan of the truck on the business. The business is paying the loan, the business is paying the interest expense, the insurance, the repair and maintenance, all of those costs the business is paying for. However, if you were to leave, if somebody were to buy you out, that truck goes with you, right? And so that company is not incurring the cost of that truck. So let's say you have $100,000 in EBITDA, right? Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, right? Net operating income, let's call it. Let's say you have $100,000 in net operating income. If you add that back in, we're adding back in those maintenance costs, the fuel costs of you, right? The truck repair and maintenance. Maybe we're adding back in $15,000 a year. So instantly your EBITDA goes from 100,000 to 115,000, right? And on a 5 to 7x multiple, you can see how that $15,000 of added seller's discretionary earnings really starts to increase this value. Okay, so seller's discretionary earnings is very important, especially when you're looking to sell to another moving company or someone that's in your local market just looking to acquire a company that's not private equity. Okay, and again, there's a lot of different things that get added to seller's discretionary earnings, but it's important for you to realize that EBITDA alone shouldn't be in that calculation. Seller's discretionary earnings should be in there because that's going to increase your value and it's more true. Okay, so it's not like we're trying to be a shyster here. We're actually trying to show what the company makes. And so we need to add those costs back in. Okay, so if you're looking to sell to a business broker client, somebody that's coming to you from a broker, chances are you're going to have to develop what that seller's discretionary earnings are. And a lot of times, you've probably heard it say that if you're not selling for $1 million in EBITDA to a private equity firm, you're only going to sell for assets plus a little goodwill. Sometimes that's true on a really, really small company. But truly what I've seen is there is some value in those companies, okay? You just have to market it right, all right? So when we're talking about selling to a broker, you have to make sure that you're showing your seller's discretionary earnings in an appropriate way so that it looks appealing to a buyer, right? Think of yourself as a buyer. If you have a couple $1,000,000, you're looking to buy a business. One, you don't really want to buy a job, but you might have some time to put into the business. Okay, so that's fine. And you're realizing that you're not going to be able to pay what it takes to buy a business that solely runs on itself. So you're going to have to put some operational time into it, right? But if you're looking to find somebody like that, they're also looking to find the business that has the highest earnings for their dollar. Okay, so we really want to ramp up that seller's discretionary earnings as much as possible so that they know exactly the earnings that they're buying when they do go to buy. Okay. So one of the local buyers is coming from a broker. The other local buyer, okay, are the other moving companies in the area. All right, so let's talk about this for a little bit. If you own a moving company or you're starting a moving company and you're in a very rural, small market, okay, it's great to get started because your competition's super low. You know about 80% of the people you're moving, right? Very easy to get started. The barrier for entry is relatively low. The problem is when you start building that company up, one, it's a little hard to scale, and you'll find out that relatively quickly. But when you're looking to sell to a competitor may not be as interested in penetrating that market area that you penetrated and all of the work that goes along with rebranding back to their brand and blah, blah, blah. Okay. What's a better way to go about it is going into a bigger market that's hungry for a new moving company, right? If it's super flush with great moving companies, you're going to have a really, really difficult time. There can be moving companies in a decent area and you can be better operationally and you can really knock the socks off of it. I've seen that a number of times, okay? But if you go into a nice populated area, you build this company up, you're doing $2-3 million in sales a year. Yeah, say your seller's discretionary earnings is $500,000, right? Half of what you need to sell to private equity. Now, all of a sudden, you're a competitor in this market. You're a big competitor in this market, right? Even though you can't sell to private equity yet, you can go to these other moving companies when it's time to sell, calculate your seller's discretionary earnings, and basically say, hey guys, we've taken $3 million a year in sales from all you guys. We're looking to exit, and it's going to somebody, right? Now, all of a sudden, you have these moving companies that are thinking, hey, you know what? I can double, triple my sales from this acquisition of this company, take a lot more market share from one purchase, and if I don't, someone else will. Okay. Now you almost get this bidding war in place where you're auctioning your company off to the highest bidder. Okay. Now, naturally, you want to take care of your company. You want to make sure that whoever's buying it is taking care of it. So you want to put certain things in place to make sure that they don't just liquidate the company and get rid of it instantly, unless you're into that, whatever. But you need to make sure that when you're distributing all of these moving companies, you're selling information, you're putting all the information you need, your seller's discretionary earnings, your financial statements, all those things. And now you have this bidding war in place for your company. That's a chunk of the market share. Okay. So those are the two main local buyers that we'll see a lot. Somebody that's looking to come in and just buy it, get out of the industry they're in and move into the moving industry, or somebody that owns another moving company and is looking to acquire yours because you have market share that they want. And the reason I love that is because usually they're really hungry. They know how the business works. They already have a brand around it. And now you have competition amongst one another, realizing that it's not just that if I don't buy it, I won't have that increase in sales. It's if I don't buy it, my competitors will increase their sales, okay? Which people don't want. That's what I've seen. If you're not selling to private equity, I've seen that work the best as a way to increase the value of your company more than just assets and a little bit of goodwill. A lot of times there is a multiple or there is substantial goodwill on the back end of that because now you've created this competition and this need for the acquisition of your moving company. So make sure you're doing those calculations again right for seller's discretionary earnings on the back end so that when you go to distribute this, again, this is what I recommend moving companies do if they're looking to sell, so that when you go to distribute these documents and start this auction, you're getting the most for your value. So again, those are the two main types of sales, private equity and then just somebody local. Usually companies go to somebody local just because it's hard to get to $1 million in EBITDA. But I'm here to say that just know that you're not only selling your company for assets. If you go local, you just have to structure the sale right and make sure that you have your documents in place so that it warrants a higher value on the sale.